Growing scrutiny tonight over what happened to missing Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jenna Browder. Welcome to Faith Nation. Well, Khashoggi was last seen at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey. And now CNN is reporting the Saudi government plans to admit he was killed in an interrogation gone wrong. This comes after President Trump spoke with the Saudi king today, who said he had no knowledge of Khashoggi's killing. And now Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is on his way to meet with him in person. Amber Strong has a look at the circumstances behind Khashoggi's disappearance.
It's been nearly 2 weeks since the disappearance of Washington Post contributor Jamal Khashoggi. President Trump says the U.S. is looking for answers.
I've asked Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to immediately get on a plane, go to Saudi Arabia, go to other places if necessary.
The president spoke to Saudi King Salman for nearly 20 minutes Monday.
The king firmly denied any knowledge of it. He didn't really know. Maybe, I don't want to get into his mind, but it sounded to me like maybe these could have been rogue killers.
The U.S. resident was last seen entering the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. His supporters fearing the worst, since Khashoggi was an outspoken critic of the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The Saudis say they're participating in the investigation, opening their consulate doors to Turkish officials Monday. On Capitol Hill, a bipartisan group of senators are calling for sanctions against the Saudi government if it was involved.
I believe the Trump administration will do something. The president has said that. But if he doesn't, Congress will. That I can tell you.
Stop military sales. Not only put sanctions on Saudi Arabia, but most importantly, get out of this terrible, terrible war in Yemen led by the Saudis.
The president says the punishment will indeed be severe, but stops short of saying what exactly it would be.
There's a lot at stake, and maybe especially so because this man was a reporter. There's something, you'll be surprised to hear me say that, there's something really terrible and disgusting about that if that were the case.
Meanwhile, growing demands for U.S. officials to drop out of an investment summit in Riyadh next week.
I don't think we should continue as business as usual until we know exactly what's happened here. Because what we do know is this. He walked into that consulate and he never came out.
On Sunday, Saudi officials promised retaliation against the U.S. should those sanctions be imposed, but have since walked that back in a tweet asking U.S. officials to refrain from jumping to conclusions. Amber Strong, CBN News in Washington.
All right, thank you, Amber. Well, Pastor Andrew Brunson is back on American soil after finally being released by the Turkish government. This weekend, a remarkable moment at the White House as he met with President Trump and even at one point prayed over the president. Pastor Brunson was imprisoned in Turkey for 2 years, charged with terrorism and espionage connected to an attempted coup. President Trump and this administration made him a symbol of religious freedom and refused to give in to Turkey, slapping crippling sanctions on the country. Tony Perkins with the Family Research Council tells CBN News all people of faith should be encouraged.
Persecuted people around the world gained hope because they know they're not alone. They know this administration has placed a priority on that.
And President Trump insisted there was no deal with the Turks for the return of Pastor Brunson and pushed back on any reports that he agreed to lift those sanctions. Well, for more now on Pastor Brunson's release and what it means for U.S.-Turkey relations and the firestorm over the fate of Jamal Khashoggi, I'm joined now by senior international reporters George Thomas and Gary Lane. Both of you, thank you for being here. George, let's go ahead and start with you. The release of Pastor Brunson, do you think that we could see a reset here with relations between the U.S. and Turkey?
I mean, not in the immediate future. We got some huge issues, not just in the Middle East, but also here as it relates to Turkey's desire to buy the S-400 missile defense system from the Russians, its involvement in Syria, its desire to buy F-35s from the United States. I use the word reset very loosely. We've got some major issues to deal with Turkey, principally its continued role in Syria, the surrounding of the last rebel stronghold of Idlib. Turkey is very much involved in it. So I think, obviously, it releases attention. By the way, it gives the Turks some sort of economic breathing room. I mean, their lira, the Turkish currency, has fell precipitously since the United States slapped sanctions on Turkey because of the Brunson case. Clearly, this will ease a little bit of those tensions, but we got some major issues to deal with as it relates to U.S.-Turkey relations.
Yeah, and that brings us to Jamal Khashoggi. Gary, let's go to you there. Sure. This whole situation with him, this really complicates relations with Turkey and the United States.
Well, it certainly does, and it isn't just the release of Brunson. Think of this, Jenna. There are Americans still being held in prison in Turkey. Among them is a man who is a former member of NASA. He also worked as a physicist from Houston, and his name is Serkan. Serkan is his name, and he is a man who has been in prison now for a couple of years, since 2016, sentenced to 7 years in prison, I believe. And so we would like to see him released as well. But the other issues, George didn't just briefly touched upon this. How about the Kurds? The United States has supported the Kurds in Syria for many years. We've given them arms, the YPG. Just this past summer, Trump said that, okay, we're not going to give them arms anymore, but we still support them. Turkey sees them as their enemy, and they want to destroy the Kurds, and they want to occupy much of northern Syria. So we are at odds over that. Also, there is a banker, a state banker that we imprisoned here in the United States for violating sanctions against Iran. It was a state bank from Turkey that gave millions of dollars to the Iranians, and he is serving now 32 months in prison. The Turks would like to see him released, but obviously the Trump administration says, look, we wanted to give him 20 years. He only got 32 months. So many issues that George touched upon.
Gary, this evening, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, he is on his way to Saudi Arabia to meet with the king there. What do you think he's likely to say? What can he do here?
Well, look, the president had that conversation with the king just this morning. I think he sent Pompeo there because he wants the king to know, look, we're serious about this. If you don't admit up to this or you don't come clean on this, you're going to have some heavy sanctions. I doubt the president wants to see, as some of the members of Congress would like to see, that military deal not go through. He says it must go through $110 billion over 10 years. The president says this will benefit American workers, about 450,000. So he doesn't want to pull that deal with the Saudis because he sees it is good for the American economy, good for American workers. But there will be pressure from Congress to move forward and renegotiate that deal or pull it entirely. And I think the reason he sent Pompeo, look, we mean business. You better come clean on this. George, how much damage can Saudi Arabia do to the global economy here? Well,
two principal areas, and Gary mentioned one of them being military. Keep in mind the United States is the largest exporter of arms around the world. Saudi Arabia imports is number 2 on that import list of arms. So clearly, if they decide that they don't want to buy arms, it's going to affect our military here in the United States. But more importantly, Saudi Arabia is the world's largest producer of oil. Every day, it pumps out about 7 million barrels of oil. If they decide to curtail those pipelines, to put a stop on those barrels rolling out of the desert sands of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, you could see the price of a barrel of oil go up 5, 6, 10 times. So that you can see, the impact of it in a very serious way. Is that going to happen? Probably not, because Saudi Arabia knows its place here in the United States and also across the large swath of the Middle East.
George Thomas and Gary Lane, thank you both so much.
You're welcome.
All right, well, in other news, President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump visited the Florida Panhandle and Georgia today to see firsthand the devastation left by Hurricane Michael. Mark Martin is here with more on their visit. Mark?
That's right, Jenna. The President and First Lady arrived Monday at Eglin Air Force Base near Valparaiso, Florida. The President said the big priority is making sure everyone's safe and has food and water. Now, the President, Hurricane Michael actually hit the Panhandle as a Category 4 storm with maximum sustained winds of 155 miles per hour. The President and First Lady viewed the devastation from the air by helicopter. The aerial tour lasted nearly an hour. Trump spoke to reporters on the tarmac before taking off.
of the most incredible things always is power. And we have thousands and thousands of electricians at the top level, but the electric companies have followed as the hurricane left. They followed right behind it. And they put on hundreds of thousands of homes that are already back. Now, the one problem is some homes don't exist anymore. I mean, they're literally wiped out. They have electric going to empty sites, but the electric companies have been really incredible and responsive. So we want to thank them too.
The Florida Panhandle took a direct hit from Michael, so there is still a lot of work to be done. More than 190,000 homes and businesses are still without power in Florida. And in Georgia, around 120,000 homes and businesses don't have electricity. The Associated Press reports that 17 people lost their lives from the hurricane. Jenna?
Mark, what has been FEMA's response?
Well, FEMA Chief Brock Long said the damage left by Hurricane Michael is some of the worst he's ever seen. He said after touring devastated areas that the damage will require government leaders to help meet the housing needs of storm victims for the next several months. Jenna?
Mark Martin, thank you very much. Tonight, President Trump is backtracking on previous claims he made, calling climate change a hoax. In an interview with 60 Minutes, the president said he thinks something is happening in regards to recent trends of powerful storms. Trump said he doesn't think climate change is man-made and won't waste money trying to fight it. He also claimed that even scientists have a political agenda. The president's comments reignited heated debate over whether climate change is a real problem or not. Well, climate change is one of the most contentious issues of our time. Many conservatives and Christians, though, don't agree that it's caused by humans or that we can affect the Earth's warming or cooling. Paul Strand talked to a high-profile Christian couple who believe climate change is a huge danger and we have a duty to fight it.
This may come as a surprise to many. Two of the more respected believers in climate change are evangelical Christians with conservative leanings, a popular pastor and his wife, a scientist time-named one of the 100 most influential people in the world. And Katharine Hayhoe's influence is growing here in Washington and with audiences both secular and religious across the world. Because this particular Christian's job adds weight to her contention, there's overwhelming evidence of climate change.
There's 26,500 indicators of a warming planet all around us, many of them in our own backyards.
Hayhoe heads up the Climate Science Center at Texas Tech.
We see our plants and our flowers and our bushes flowering earlier in the year. We see birds and animals and insects much further north than they've ever been before. We see that sea level is rising, glaciers are melting, our weather patterns are changing.
CBN News talked to Hayhoe and her husband, Pastor Andrew Farley, in his home state of Virginia. Growing up there, he considered global warming an environmental fad.
Whether it's save the whales or hug the trees or eat granola, wear hemp.
Farley and his bride fought over climate science for about 2 years.
And I would even go to climate denier websites and find all the ammunition that I could find and come back to her and say, but honey, what about this and what about that?
The evidence Hayhoe and others had of a definite radical spike in temperatures and carbon dioxide finally got to Farley.
Her determination to show me the facts, and then, quite frankly, going to NASA's website and looking at global temperature over the last 200 years and just saying, look what's happened, here's this spike, it's undeniable. Either all of NASA is duped or maybe there's some validity to this thing.
But Hayhoe says global warming is hurting, even killing thousands of people now, like causing stronger, longer heat waves.
In 2003, there was a heat wave in Europe that led to 70,000 premature deaths. That's 70,000 people died who would not have died otherwise because that heat wave was so extreme.
And stronger, frequent rainfalls leading to more flooding.
If the air is warmer, more water evaporates out of the ocean and lakes and rivers. When a storm comes along, as it always does naturally, there's more water vapor available for that storm to pick up and dump on us. We're also seeing that hurricanes are getting not more frequent, but stronger because they get all their energy from warm ocean water.
And in the future, she sees trouble coming for millions, especially those on coastlines.
There are nearly 300 million people who will lose their land as sea level rises this century.
Her frequent public appearances, reasonable arguments, and down-to-earth style have led some to say Hayhoe's the best communicator about climate change in the world.
She is at the intersection of science and faith. She's bringing her expertise in the science field, and she's bringing her faith in Jesus Christ, and she's saying, hey Christians, this thing, this time is actually real, and we need to be doing something about it.
Hayhoe works to rule out natural suspects that could warm the earth, like the sun has done in the past.
For the last 40 or 50 years or so, the sun's energy has been going down while our Earth's temperature has been going up.
How about the natural cycles that happen over centuries?
The next thing that should be happening on that time scale is another ice age. But we're getting warmer and warmer.
As she points to her number one suspect, you see the evangelical in this scientist and child of missionaries come alive.
When we burn coal and oil and natural gas, it releases that carbon trapped in those fuels into the atmosphere. And in the atmosphere, we already have this amazing natural blanket that God has designed for our planet that keeps us almost 60 degrees warmer than we would be otherwise. When putting all that extra carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, we're adding to that blanket. We're overheating. That's what we're doing to our planet.
Pastor Farley says Christians are scripturally bound as God's stewards of the earth to take action if two things are true.
Is this happening, and are we contributing to it? And those answers are yes and yes.
Hayhoe suggests fighting globally for practices and methods that reduce carbon emissions and then reducing your own carbon footprint. You can start simply.
If every home in the entire United States replaced just one light bulb with a new LED, that would be like taking 1 million cars off the road. And we would each save $30 in electricity over the lifetime of the bulb, even taking into account the fact that the bulb costs more than a regular one.
Then just keep encouraging yourself and others to reduce carbon output. Like with commuting. Mix it up sometimes. Work from home, carpool, take public transport, or bike. I've been commuting like this happily for 42 years now. And buy locally grown or made. Insulate, recycle, compost. Even if Farley and Hayhoe are wrong about global warming, you'll at least make for a cleaner, healthier planet. Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
The countdown to Election Day is on. Up next, why Democrats' blue wave may be crashing early. Well, the midterm elections are just a few weeks away, and CBN political analyst John Wegge is with us now to talk about the hotly contested Senate races. John, good to see you.
Thanks, Jenna. Good to be with you.
You know, we hear a lot about this blue wave that's supposed to give Democrats control of the House and the Senate. What's your take, John? What's your sense here?
Well, it seems that the blue wave might be gradually reduced to a trickle here. It really is, in the Senate especially. I think these Senate races that have come, we've got a map here that shows that there are really 6 Democratic seats and 4 Republican Senate seats that are endangered. These are the toss-up races, and these are the races that are going to decide control of the Senate. The Republicans now control the Senate 51 to 49, if you count the 2 independents who vote with the Democrats. And so the Democrats would have to make a net gain of 2 seats in order to take over the Senate control, which, of course, that if they did that, they'd control the judiciary and all the committees that we just witnessed with Kavanaugh and many others besides. But in this case, the Kavanaugh hearings appear to have had a pretty big effect, and if we go to those states, we can see that the Democrats actually have more to defend than the Republicans do. And in the 4 states, the Republicans have hotly contested races where they're the incumbents or where there's an open seat. In 2 of those states, in Texas and Tennessee, the candidates seem to be pulling a bit away from their Democratic challengers. So that really leaves 2 states, Arizona and Nevada, that are still very, very tight. So the Democrats really have an option of only 2 states to gain, and they'd need those 2, and then they'd need to hold all those other 6 states to take control of the Senate. So it's looking a bit bleak for them.
Yeah. John, you mentioned the Kavanaugh confirmation process. Of those blue states, only one Democratic senator actually voted to confirm Kavanaugh. That was Joe Manchin of West Virginia. What do you think his odds look like? Do you think it's a red state? Do you think voters there will support him, or will they go for the Republican candidate?
It's interesting. They love Joe Manchin in West Virginia, and Joe Manchin voted to like you said, to approve Kavanaugh, and he's the one with an almost double-digit lead in all the races that we're looking at. So it looks like he is pulling away, but Morrissey is hanging close enough that if Republicans continue to be energized over the next 3 weeks, he's not out of it. But Manchin's the one with the best chance of holding on to a seat of all those 6 Democratic seats that have tight races. So.
Yeah.
And you know, you can't ignore the speculation that he might change parties, because he's going to be very lonely in the Democratic caucus when they next resume in January if he does win. So
yeah. You know, John, Axios was calling it the Brett bounce. After the confirmation process, we saw just this surge of enthusiasm for Republican candidates.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think, though, that can last? These remaining few weeks, can that push Republicans past the finish line?
I think, Jenna, that it's very possible, and the reason is that people witnessed those hearings, and Republicans were very upset. Where they had been a bit complacent, they became energized, and I don't think that energy is going to stop, because big things were at stake here. I mean, we're talking about due process, innocent until proven guilty, even though it wasn't in a court of law. We applied that across the board in the United States. These people see many people see it as a threat to the republic. And when the character of your nation is at stake, as many people, Republicans and independents, believe, I do think that energy can last through the next 3 weeks, but we'll have to see. You never know what could come up as an issue between now and then. So
yeah, there are a lot of news cycles between now and then. John, you know, Democrats, they've run a lot of their campaigns mostly against Trump. Is there another issue that could be trouble for the GOP?
I think if there were one, it would be health care. I think that they're trying to represent Republicans as failing to repeal and replace Obamacare, as they said they would do during the Trump campaign of 2016. But I know Trump's fighting back, and Mike Pence, campaigning in Indiana for the Republican Mike Braun this weekend, was saying that they're misrepresenting the Republican theme on health care, that they will cover pre-existing conditions, which is a big fear among a lot of voters of all parties. And so Republicans are trying to say, hey, wait a minute, the Democrats are totally misrepresenting us on that. And there's no doubt that health care is a big issue. But I'm not sure it's going to be the biggest one. I think the biggest one may be, are you for Trump's agenda or are you opposed to it? Because the economy's roaring, whether the Democrats want to admit it or not. And if President Trump can sell that, it's interesting to me that he's going from state to state, city to city, over and over and over again. So it's not like he's hiding in the tall grass because he's not welcome. He's very welcome wherever he's been going, and having thousands of people at his rallies. So, you know, something's got to be working on that front.
We just saw him, the other night in Tennessee, campaigning for Marsha Blackburn in the Senate race there. We also saw Taylor Swift come out against Marsha Blackburn.
Yeah.
What's the latest there? There she is, Marsha Blackburn and Phil Bredesen. What do you think? Yeah, Bredesen. What do you think can happen there, John?
Well, you know, Bredesen was actually leading in several of the polls, and Marsha Blackburn came up during the Kavanaugh hearings, and the Taylor Swift thing certainly hasn't helped, if we're to believe the latest New York Times poll, which shows her up 14 points. I mean, that's not even a toss-up anymore, if it's true. And some of these polls, you can't totally vouch for the accuracy, but she's been moving ahead in the Real Clear Politics average of polls as well. And it came right on the heels of Taylor Swift's endorsement. I think part of it, you know, there's another poll out that says, you know, people are sick of political correctness. I think they're also getting sick of celebrities thinking that their endorsement is the same as having newspaper endorsements 50 years ago. It's not a big deal, and I think the Tennessee race is showing that.
Yeah, we will see. All right, political analyst John Wege. Thanks so much, John.
Thanks, Jenna.
From George Washington to Donald Trump, every U.S. president has taken the oath of office with his hand on the Bible. President Trump used two, and one of them sits at the Museum of the Bible.
If you place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right,
a time-honored tradition.
I, William Jefferson Clinton,
Followed at every swearing-in ceremony for each U.S. president.
preserve, protect, and defend.
President Trump took his oath on not one, but 2 Bibles, Abraham Lincoln's and his own from his childhood, now on display at the Museum of the Bible.
So the Bible that we have here is the Bible that was presented to him by his mother when he was almost 9 years old, when he graduated from Sunday school from Presbyterian Church in Queens, New York.
The story of how it got here is one Vice President Pence recently told a group of pastors at an event put on by the Family Research Council.
So I was with Steve Green. I was with the whole Hobby Lobby team. It was time we went over there for a conference, and he said, well, we've got a formal request in, for a Bible from the president. We'd like to display one of his Bibles. And I said, oh, here at the Bible Museum? He said, yeah. And I said, I got that. I said, let me take that one.
Pence told him to forget about the paperwork and took the request right to the president.
So anyway, I got back that night, and he called me up, and we usually check in at the end of the day. And I said, hey, by the way, I was over at the Bible Museum, and they want to display one of your Bibles. And he said, they want to display one of my Bibles? And I said, yeah, I mean, like put it in a case, and people can see it. And he said, well, that's great. He goes, hang on a second. He goes, it's around here somewhere. Hang on a second. And he puts the phone down. And I hear him rummaging around. And he came back to the phone and said, got it, I got it. He said, I'll bring it in tomorrow.
Sure enough, Pence says Trump brought the Bible to the Oval Office.
The president started in with all the briefers, and then he looked at me and he goes, he pushed the Bible over in my direction. And I picked it up, and I opened it up, and it was inscribed from his mother.
Inside is a note from the day Trump was confirmed in his faith.
He said, is that one okay? Is that good? And I said, oh, this will be good.
The museum's request settled just like that.
It's pretty exciting for us here.
And for the thousands who can now see Trump's Bible when they visit. And a special place, the Museum of the Bible. Well, that's going to do it for Faith Nation this evening. We'll see you right back here again tomorrow. Have a great night.